Hello, welcome to Rappler Talk. I'm Marites Vitug, and joining us is lawyer, legal academic Cristina Bonoan. She's a lecturer at the Angeles University School of Law, and she was part of a team that did a study on the Philippine Supreme Court justices and their voting behavior. It's a pioneering study on how informal networks and factors influence how justices decide or vote on a case. So welcome to Rappler Talk, Attorney Cristina Bonoan.
Thank you.
We're very glad you could make it. So maybe let's start first with the findings of the study you co-authored with other academics.
I'm not actually an author. This is a multi-study on Supreme Courts or constitutional courts in Southeast Asia. The authors are Drs. Bjorn Dressel, who is a political scientist, also trained in law, and econometrician Dr. Tomo Inoue. So I was only involved in the Philippine study as part of the research team.
Yes, but that's what we're very interested in.
Yes,
okay.
Of course. So, of course, our study is looking at the different factors that affect decision-making of the Supreme Court. Of course, we recognize that first and foremost, the law is the primary factor that affects decision-making. Whatever we say about the Supreme Court and the judiciary, I still think it's the most professional organization, one of the most professional institutions in this country, primarily because the entry barriers are very high. You know, I mean, first you need a legal degree, and it's not easy to get to become a member of the bar, and then you also need a certain number of experience in the law. So judges in general, and justices in particular, are not just learned in the law, but they're also experienced in the law. So yes, politics might play a role, but it plays a role even in the private sector, right? But now we're looking at, okay, the law is still the primary motivation for deciding cases, but we're now looking at what what other factors may influence decision making at that level. So our study really started by looking at social biographical data of all the justices from 1986 to 2015.
It's pretty extensive.
Yes. And this is, although this is just all their published data, of course we wouldn't know, like we didn't get to interview them, so this is published data, publicly available. And then, so we looked at gender, age of appointment, law schools, past work experience. And then we also looked at another set of data, which are, we looked at decisions of the Supreme Court in cases which we identify, so it's a subset of cases that we have identified. It's a small sample of Supreme Court cases from 1986 to 2015, and we identified these as mega political cases or high-profile political cases. And we looked at the votes of each justice in these sets of cases, in this set of cases.
So from 1986 to 2015. Okay.
Yes. We did a bit of an update, but we still haven't included that in the bulk of the data, so we can't really say, like, from 2015 to 2018, we can't do a statistical analysis yet of that. Right? So basically, I mean, we're looking at we're really the purpose of the study is to test anecdotal evidence, such as what you, like the stories in your book, or publications, or like media coverage, or public opinions and common beliefs on the court. And we just wanted to test that and see patterns of behavior, right? And for example, some of the findings of our study, for example, we found that in the cases that we looked at, which is again a small subset of cases, a justice, an average justice, who was appointed by a sitting president is more likely or has a higher tendency to vote for that sitting administration as compared with a justice who was not appointed by that sitting president.
That, I think, is one of your key findings. And even if it only covered until 2015, I think this will also most likely apply to 2015 and beyond.
Most likely, yes,
Yes.
because so far we did brief look at 2015 to 2018 cases, and yes, so far the trend holds.
So under President Duterte, since he has appointed many number of justices already, the trend is they vote in favor of the executive, or in a case that involves the executive, they vote in favor of the president, right? That's, I
Or
think,
in
one
favor of
your-
the policies of the administration,
administration.
yes. So far, in the cases under Duterte, all have been favorable to this administration.
I think-
at least the mega political cases that we looked at.
Yes, those include the Marcos burial case.
Marcos burial case, the 3 martial law cases,
Oh, that's right.
and well,
Acquittal of Congresswoman Arroyo. Is that
yes,
part of it?
yes,
The bail granted to Senator Enrile.
Enrile, yes, and of course, the ouster of
Of the Chief Justice. Okay, I keep forgetting that. Okay, so what's the next big finding in the study you participated in? Because you talked of informal networks.
Yes.
So the first was the appointing power has
Yes.
well, they tend to vote with the appointing power.
Another interesting study is actually the average female justice, and how the average female justice has a tendency to vote more against the government as opposed to the average male justice.
Really?
Well, at least in the cases that we looked at.
Yeah. So I like women better.
Well, of course, it's not really. We have fewer female justices, so of course that also affects the numbers.
Right.
And another interesting finding is what we call in judicial politics studies as strategic defection. So you know how it might. We've observed in the cases that we've studied in the Philippines that when the president's term is about to expire, the court is less likely to vote in favor of that president. And this has been observed in other countries, and that's why we have this term called strategic defection. And I think the rationale there is that perhaps the court is starting to distance itself from a president that is soon to be departing.
So it's very interesting. It's very political in that sense.
Yes.
Although you said they were anchored in law, but their decisions tended to.
But of course, we're only looking at highly political cases, right? We're not
Okay.
looking at the whole set of cases.
Okay.
These are a drop in the bucket of all the cases that are decided by the Supreme Court, right?
So after all, they are affected by big political events. The justices, I mean.
Well, perhaps. I mean, it's not in all cases, and still, even if you do decide, even if politics might influence a justice, I think every justice would still anchor their decisions on law, and maybe they're not even aware of political influence. Maybe this is really their policy preference.
And I think in the study that you contributed to, you also looked at university and professional backgrounds.
So what we did, so it's not just the statistical trend analysis, but we also looked at what we call social network analysis. So this is sort of, this is a new way of analyzing the way, for example, Facebook might target ads for us. So we created assumed networks because we don't really know who are justices, their actual friends, who are their actual friends, right? So we created assumed or imagined networks based on assumptions based on how close they are demographically, geographically. So, for example, if you went to the same law school within 4 years of each other, it's more likely that you belong to similar networks. It's logical. although it's not necessarily true, because I went to UP Law, but there are so many personalities there that I've never met, you know, even if we went to law school within 4 years of each other. And then the same, so we looked at two possible networks. The first is law school, and the second would be more work experience if they were in the Sandigan Bayan together or Court of Appeals. Again, these are assumptions, right? And there are limitations to this. And so what we looked at is, now if two justices are within the same networks, would they tend to vote together? And then we looked at, now what if we get the influence of the president and the Chief Justice? So for example, earlier we said that if you are appointed by a president, then you are more likely to vote for that president, right? Yes. But what about if you are friends or you are in the same network with another justice and you are appointed by the president? Will that justice who is also within your network also vote for the president, even if that justice is not himself appointed by that president? So we looked at that as well. So that's the question that we're asking, and that's really social network analysis. And for law schools, we found that this is not the case. It's not significant. There's no effect by the presidential appointment. There is a slightly higher effect when it comes to work, when you're in the network of work experience. And then the next one is the influence of the Chief Justice, of whether or not you're in the same network as the Chief Justice. And that has a bit higher, that has more significant effect.
So I think we're doing this interview now in the context of the upcoming appointment or choice of a new Chief Justice. So you're saying it's the influence of the Chief Justice also matters in the way justices vote.
If they are within strong networks, yes.
Because under President Duterte, he has appointed a number of justices from his own law school, San Beda mainly, although he has not really been their classmate. Their classmate. As long as you're from that network, that seems to be his favorite spot. Now, if a new Chief Justice would be appointed, and this Chief Justice is within the network of the President, do you think this will have more impact on the way justices vote?
Well, it would also depend on the network of the justices themselves, right? It's not necessarily just the network, your closeness to the appointing power, but the closeness also of the justices within the court.
So now that the Supreme Court has been through a turbulent time. You know this very well. You've written up on this. The Chief Justice, Sereno, was ousted in a questionable quo warranto case. And I was wondering what the impact of this was or is on the institution, and also how
itself. And of course, these are related. Legally, now we have new case law. It has impacted case law and constitutional law, because before, we know that before, justices and members of the Supreme Court cannot be removed except by impeachment, and now that's changed. Of course, this decision has been highly criticized, and by law professors, constitutional experts, including the integrated bar. And I think people also, the general public, did not understand this decision. And of course, that will reflect also on public opinion and the credibility of the court. You know, when you have decisions that don't appear to be legally sound or within the reasonable bounds of law.
And any one of them now sitting on the court can be ousted by a
second thing that I think they have weakened themselves politically. I mean, traditionally, the court is the weakest branch of government, and before, justices were protected by the guarantee that they can only be impeached, but now they can now be removed otherwise.
So the Chief Justices after Sereno was ousted, well, at least the first one, Chief Justice De Castro, was a weaker Chief Justice in that sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, any justice is weaker in that sense. I mean, whether no quo warranto cases were filed against her, so then she wasn't affected. But there's always that possibility now, and that's why I think it's the institution that has been weakened.
I see. And it has compromised the independence of the institution?
Well, not yet until a case is filed, but now there is a possibility to compromise the independence of an institution by a threat to do so.
Right? So what the JBC is going to start its search for a new Chief Justice. So looking from the outside, what qualities would a Chief Justice under these circumstances need to run a weakened institution, or maybe to strengthen it or to reform it?
Well, definitely independence, but of course, independence is a required quality of all members of the Supreme Court. But I think as a leader, it's not just independence in how one votes in the decisions, but also in how one defends the institution in terms of especially the budget, for example, fiscal independence. That's very important because really a Chief Justice is just one vote.
Correct.
But he is the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of the whole judiciary. And that's what I think, that's the more important role of a Chief Justice. And so there's independence in that, in defending the institution, but also in, well, I think another important quality is managerial skills. We don't think of this. We only think, oh, justices and the Chief Justice must be a legal scholar. But really, he or she must be a good manager. And although, of course, we also put a lot of pressure on the Chief Justice, but we have to remember that the court is a collegial body. So leadership skills also needs to be present. You know, you have to be able to rally the rest of the court in favor of your own vision. So I think that's vital too.
Yes. Recently, or weeks ago, the President said that he would choose the next Chief Justice based on seniority. And he did not say and merit. So what else would you add to this seniority factor? Is it really that important to place seniority, on a pedestal?
I've been I've been of two minds about this. Like, obviously, there's a rationale why the Constitution or the law gave the president the prerogative to pick anyone, right? As long as they have the basic requirements under the Constitution. So you don't want to stem the discretion of the executive because this is really their prerogative. But at the same time, so that's the legal. Like, can he do it? But then there's the wisdom of a decision, and I think that is on a case-to-case basis, right? And in this, as a general rule, I agree with going with seniority, only because if our aim is to depoliticize the Supreme Court, then why not go with seniority? Why not go with tradition? It just shows you that I'm not playing politics, right? Of course, in the U.S. Supreme Court, Justice Roberts was taken from outside of the court and made into a Chief Justice, and nobody really, it didn't cause a stir. It was fine, but it's a different it's a different, they have different politics from us. And maybe here, and especially after what happened, you know, I think this is the time to dial down the politics.
Yes.
So maybe, especially now, it would be a good idea to go back to tradition. And I think it would boost not just the credibility of the court, but the credibility of the executive as well. Especially since he had already said that that he plans to nominate or to appoint based on seniority.
What's interesting here, and maybe what keeps us guessing, is that the most senior justice is Justice Carpio, has been was taken different positions from the president on West Philippine Sea and on human rights and killings and ICC withdrawal. And so we're all, you know, waiting what will happen. What is your take on this?
Well,
if you were to speculate.
I can't speculate. This is not my decision. But I think if it were my decision, even if I felt like a Chief Justice was not, if I were a president and I felt like a Chief Justice was not favoring my positions, my policy positions, well, I would look at more, rather than looking at how they vote in cases, does it really matter? He's only one vote. What I would look at is how will they steer the institution, you know, and as a manager of the judiciary, because I think that's the more important role of the Chief Justice.
Yeah, you're actually right, and I think the executive, they need to look at this in this perspective. And so if the new Chief Justice were appointed, what are the top 3 reforms that he or she should do, you know, at this very difficult time, what to do with the institution, the top 3 reforms?
Again, I think we're looking at, we're putting too much pressure on a Chief Justice because he's not the only one in the court, yes. But I think some of the things that need to be addressed are the decentralization of decision making in the whole judiciary. And this is not just with this court.
Yeah.
This has plagued the court for decades.
For a long time.
You know, even procurement is still highly centralized in Manila, and a lot of decision making is still highly centralized. Another is the transparency in the budget as well, and I think the most important actually is declogging the dockets, which is also connected with ensuring that that we fill vacancies within the courts, because I think we have now a 20% vacancy rate.
Yeah, what's causing that? Because the JBC knows when these seats will be vacated, these courts will be vacated, yet the appointments take a long time.
I'm not sure if it's
Can we blame someone?
Well, I think we can. I think we can blame Congress.
Okay.
I think it's budget first and foremost, right? I mean, yes, it's true that perhaps in some areas fewer judges apply, but also if we had more of a budget, then we can fill these. And I think that's why it's not really just up to the Chief Justice. It's up to other institutions to say, if we really want to push for judicial reform, if we're really serious about the justice sector, we would fund it. Because, you know, it's one thing to say, oh, justice sector reform, but if we're only giving about 1% of the budget to the judiciary, the whole judiciary, then it just shows that it's not a priority, right?
So that also means, as a leader of the judiciary, the Chief Justice has to deal with Congress, lobby with Congress?
Well, I don't think he goes directly to Congress. I think there are people who
do that for the Chief Justice.
Yes. But yeah, I think it's important that public opinion as well. I mean, I guess if if you also have a more credible Chief Justice, and they're saying that you need to the more credible Chief Justice and a court is, public opinion will also be in favor of increasing the budget of the judiciary, right? I mean, right now, people don't, perhaps, you know, if you don't feel that connection, that you don't actually use the judiciary, it's really removed from you, then you won't actually press for more funds for it. It's connected that way.
It's a very interesting point you raised, that we should not look at the Chief Justice or the judiciary in isolation, and from a very narrow lens. So on that note, thank you so much, Attorney Cristina Bonoan, and I hope that the executive will take a longer view on choosing the next Chief Justice. Thank you very much for listening, and we hope you will join us in future episodes of Rappler Talk.